prime thing is you have to win.
There you go. There you go. That's what I'm talking about. Hey, Mark, settle down a little bit.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Just Win podcast. I'm Ted Nguyen. That's my co-host Marshall Newhouse. And I love your hat, man. If you, for you guys that are listening to the podcast, he has a hat that says lineman. I need to give me a hat that says podcaster or something.
Yeah, I work with some lineman proud. It's actually made by O lineman. Guys play in the league, play at TCU, so I rep it when I can.
Nice. Yeah, I need a film watcher hat or something. The Raiders are in their bye week, so we're not previewing a game today. Today we are going to look back on some of our concerns with the Raiders, just topics we want to talk about with this team and moving forward and what they should do in the bye week. We compiled some stats that we think will be interesting to break down about this team, and these stats will probably get looked at by the coaching staff, or similar stats will get looked at by the coaching staff. We hope
they're watching our show, obviously, to
yeah.
how they go about the team. So
exactly. But first we'll get into some all 22 notes about the previous game in which the Raiders got blown out by the Chiefs, but we won't hash over that too much. But one thing I did want to talk about when watching over the film is I'm starting to get concerned about Chip Kelly and his offense, and I have to correct myself. In the last episode, I said he made $8 million a year. He actually makes $6 million a year, but he's still the highest paid offensive coach.
That part was right.
League.
Yes.
Yeah. So, just watching over the plays, there were like a bunch of repeated plays which you don't like. They started the game with a nice little reverse motion to Trey Tucker, in which he got the ball on kind of an RPO type of concept, and he was able to get some decent yardage off of it. And then they run the play a few plays later, and then the defense is ready for it, and he gets blown up. And then we mentioned already the third down menu is very small. They don't run a ton of passing concepts, especially in third and long. Those two interceptions that Geno threw against the Bears, or the first two of them, were the same play. It was a dagger play on third and long. In this Chiefs game, they ran sail on a third and long, which is a play that they run a lot. So during a bye week, you want to see them expand the drop back menu. It's the NFL. Like, you can't let teams know what you're doing. And then they run 3 screen plays in a row, and I'm glad they're working under screen game. But like, a screen is not really a trick play, but you're trying to catch the defense off guard with the trick play. So when you're running a trick play 3 plays in a row, it just takes the surprise element out of it. So you don't want to see that. That's kind of like Luke Getsy type of territory. And the final thing is the timing of the routes. Like, I've noticed this since week 1, where Geno would get to the top of his route and guys aren't ready to break yet. They're not breaking. So it's just the details in a passing game. Because when a quarterback has the top of his route, his first read should be breaking at that point, because if it's open, the quarterback should be able to throw it. And then he can hitch to his next route and hitch into his next route. That's how a good passing game looks like. But there are times when Geno Smith gets to top of his route and guys just aren't breaking. Is that the receiver's fault, or is that the play design fault? There was one play where they started with a loaded backfield. So they had 3 players in a backfield, and it was a play action. And I think they're trying to get Michael Mayer, who was lined up in a backfield, open on a pop route. But Geno got to the top of his route, and Mayer was still running through the backfield. So he didn't even get to the top of his route yet. And Geno just had to check the ball down, and the check down was covered because there's nothing stressing the flat defender. So it's like these details that really need to get ironed out and really need to get cleaned up for this offense to be functional. And it's just not things that you want to see. And I get it. It's the first year in this offense, but the details need to be a lot better. The play sequencing needs to get a lot better. And, again, you're making $6 million a year, Chip Kelly. Like, this needs to be better.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, so much of that has borne itself out. Geno has made his fair share of like forced throws and mistakes, but we've seen what he can do when guys are breaking when they're supposed to break. Like a lot of these deep end breakers and the sail routes, there's a very clear progression of when his back foot hits, he's ready to rip it. And I don't know if it's, some of it's urgency off the line and receivers in their release, how they're stemming their release, and maybe they're doing too much. This new era of receivers that are getting a lot more instruction on route running in the off season. And it's a lot of times, I've heard this from there's not as much urgency just getting into the route and vertical. And because so much of that is timing based. And what we're seeing is that Geno there's a lack of trust in the timing. And so I think earlier in the season when they wanted to push the ball down the field, once you lose Brock Bowers, he's forcing some balls in places that probably shouldn't have been forced because he's not getting the timing and the synced up nature with the receivers that I think he's used to. And so I agree with that. I think some of that is savvy. A lot of that is play design. Listen, there's coaches, there's coordinators all over the league that I don't think have as complicated as a scheme, but they have 8 or 9 concepts they run to a T, and then they could window dress them and make them look different from formation and motioning pre-snap. And so it's not really about there being anything new under the sun that Chip Kelly needs to do or call. There's a level of execution that I think has been missing. There's just a level of attention from the defense when you lose a weapon like Brock Bowers. I mean, ultimately, if I'm a coordinator or I'm a top-down free safety, if I don't believe any of these guys are a threat to run over the top, the field shrinks by a lot. And so I think these are all kind of combined issues. And you would like to think that a problem-solving coach, kind of a chess-playing coach, has reaction to that. And as you mentioned, the sequencing, it's like, are these some of these predetermined for situations? Because a screen call is a pace-changing call. It's meant to slow down a pass rush. You don't run screens early in the game unless you've got a revved up defensive front, an electric environment, like emotions that tied into when you call a screen, and to do it after you kind of already made them kind of think twice with gadget plays and trick plays. You're absolutely right as far as that being a sequencing problem and thinking through how you're calling play calls. And listen, they've been obsessed with 11 personnel. I wanted more 12 when Brock Bowers is healthy, but even without Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer is serviceable absolutely as a receiver, as a number 1 tight end option. But to me, that gives you a lot of variability if you are indeed trying to have a balanced attack, quote unquote balanced attack that Chip Kelly wants, and that Pete Carroll wants, and you're trying to get your number 6 overall pick running back involved in the game. And so I would love to see more of that, even if they're holding. We assume that they still want him to come back healthy. That's why this bye week was so important. He's going to come back, work his way back in. Even before that, though, Pete Carroll is a guy that you could put in there, and even if you don't need 2 Tony Gonzalez as a tight end to make 12 personnel work, that's just not the NFL. Everyone has a stud, but you can do a lot of formation variation. I talked so much about being able to run duo or different schemes that can make that you can make look the same, and then you can build so many things off of those teams. And you're allowed to do that when you can have tight ends in league formation, stack them. You can balance out formations and have them on both sides, motion them across, get reads from the linebacking core. And so we hope that they said they're going to self-scout. Everyone does. And what do they find? I'll be very interested to see what they find and how that then in turn informs how they call plays moving forward.
That leads us into our next segment, in which we're going to break down some stats with the Raiders in the first 7 games. And you talked about the 2 tight ends, multiple tight end sets. And one of the stats that I wanted to talk about was there's not a lot of encouraging stats for the Raiders offense, but one stat that is very encouraging is that they are 10th in the league in explosive play rate out of 12 personnel. And that without, with a hobbled Brock Bowers, without Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer missing some time. So I think, going into the bye week, assuming Michael Mayer is going to be back, assuming Brock Bowers is going to be more healthy, that, there's a possibility that the Raiders can be a very effective 12 personnel team with the talent they have. And one of the caveats for making 12 personnel work is you have to have a run threat. And even though the Raiders had a lot of negative plays, it's very clear that defenses are still respecting the fact that Ashton Genty is back there. So you can create some explosive with the threat of Genty there with two talented tight ends, and hopefully you can build off of that. And also, Jack Besh is a guy that you could put in the box, and he serves as another type of tight end because he has the potential to be a very good blocker, and we've seen some of that already.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really encourage them to give that a shot. And that stat alludes to it. That's not one that you see that often. But I hope that they see that and their eyes just kind of light up, because it's not the end all be all. It doesn't fix everything, but with what you have, I think that is a big it's a weapon to use at your disposal, because it just provides so much formation variability. And this, if you're looking at trends across the league has gone to under center, early play action, two tight end sets, bunch looks, duo, inside zone, motion off that zone. And that's not meaning you have to be a copycat. You want to be your own team, lean into your own strengths. But the reason that the Rams continue to be a potent offense, the reason that the Kyle Shanahans of the world continue to be potent offenses, is that they have awareness of what their individual matchups are, but also what kind of trending is working across the league. And for whatever reason, Chip Kelly has not focused on that. I don't know if that's his adjustment back into the NFL after being in college for a few years. So we'll see how they respond. But they can only go up from you talked about the explosive plays out of 12 personnel, but points per game, their EPA on offense can only go up. And so I don't see why. And then if they end up hold on to Jakobi Meyers, we'll see. He's a guy who can be an asset. I think he's an asset for trading. And people have talked about that, but it doesn't seem like they're necessarily in the selling mood. So if you're going to keep him, use him wisely. It's kind of ultimately what I'm getting at.
Yeah. And I think, we talked about the Raiders needing to find identity. And at least if they could be an effective offense from 12 personnel, they could build something out of that. And that could be the start of your identity, and obviously it's going to depend on Bowers and how healthy he looks. But presumably you'll have Bowers and Mayer coming out of the bye week. Let's build on that and let's see, what you can do. And I think, if you're Chip Kelly, you really need to have a smart plan for your run game designs out of 12 personnel, the play action from it, and get creative, because he's got, Bowers is a mismatch type of guy. Genty is a guy you create mismatches with. This is the start of where everything is for the offense, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And I'm very curious to see your thoughts that apparently we might have a little bit of a QB competitiveness kind of boiling up. I'm very interested to see, they had a couple practices before the players got some time off. When they report back, we know how steadfast Pete Carroll is for Geno, and his, connectivity to the offense. I wonder how serious they are about potentially having a competition right now to see who's going to have playing time as the signal caller for the Raiders. We'll see. I don't know. Have you heard much about that?
Well, Aiden O'Connell will be back from his, I believe it's a wrist injury he had in the preseason. I think it's going to take a lot for there to be actually a quarterback competition, because you traded a third-round pick for Geno Smith. You gave him this big contract, and to admit that you were this wrong this early, would take a lot, in my opinion. So I don't see it happening soon. But if he goes out there and he's throwing 3 interceptions a game again, in the next few games, then I guess, then it would have to be a competition. You would have to think about doing something. But I don't think it's going to happen during the bye week.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. And I think ultimately it could just be an optics thing of, where they're trying to light a fire under Geno. 10 interceptions is just like untenable for anyone. And so even with the draft capital and the money tied up, I understand them wanting to at least seem like they're addressing that in some kind of way. But I agree. It's just, he's still the best QB in their QB room, which is saying a lot when he's playing like he's supposed to play. But we're all waiting to see if like the Geno we thought that we were getting in the trade has just gone. And if he's just gone, money or not, they've got to put something out in the field that has been playing better than he's playing. But he'll get the first crack, the second crack, and then we'll see how these first few weeks off the bye go. So it's very interesting. I mean, Pete has been. I think there's a valid criticism about Pete's language when it comes to personnel. We talked about JPJ earlier with the Epic Alex Happa, and people are just trying to figure out why he's doing the things he's doing, picking fights in certain places that there don't seem to be need fights and friction, and other places not even really seemingly taking them as serious as other ones. So I'm very just like, I think most fans are wondering kind of what this process is going to look like moving forward. If, coming out of the bye, he's still speaking in the same way about things that seem kind of obvious to people.
Yeah, for sure. It's just weird that there's true competition in some places, and other places it doesn't seem like there's any competition. So
Right.
that's definitely something that would irk me as a player. But I think like you have. I get giving certain players like a leash, especially early in a season, but I would think it would have to be some true competition in some places if it just continues on during the season. Which brings me to my next stat.
Yeah.
Caillou Blue has, and I got this from Tristan Kuhn from X, so shout out to him. But Caillou Blue has allowed plus 26.9 EPA this season, the most of any defender in coverage, at 423 yards. Again, most of any defender in coverage. So, I mean, he's not a rookie, but he is in his first year in the system. He's a young player, and Pete has talked about wanting to help him. But you also have Darian Porter, who has looked good in the times that he has played. So I think when you have a guy that's this big of a black hole in your defense, like you have to consider putting Darian Porter in there. I mean, that should be one of the first competitions that opens up. I think during this bye week.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotten to the point where we're watching live games and he's getting picked on, he's getting targeted, and even though he's a rookie, Darian Porter's grades, he's grading out really well for a rookie. So he, and when he's in man coverage, he has a really exceptional grade. And it's a weird thing because you generally, if a rookie is kind of in over his head and you can tell in camp, then throwing him out there into the fire doesn't always serve him. We understand that. So it's not an always or never case. But this absolutely feels like Darian Porter belongs in the NFL. It's not too big for him. And maybe, yeah, you throw him in there and he makes a few mistakes, but he will learn faster. He's one of those guys, I think, who will learn faster from live rounds, from live reps. And why they're depriving him of that, just there's got to be something that we just don't know. And I talked about this with JPJ. There's just like a friction that we don't know about? Are they protecting him from something? Does he just not have it mentally? Like if you don't know any of your assignments, yeah, they can't trust you to be out there. But when he has been out there, he's performed pretty well, pretty admirably. And so I imagine there's got to be a shakeup. If they're doing any kind of good faith self-assessment, self-scouting, there's got to be a shakeup to at least get him on the field. Even if you want to keep Caillou Blue out there, then you move Darren Porter to the other side of the field and you let him roam around. You let him be a guy who can match up on a guy in zone in certain third down scenarios or whatever, but use his skill set in some way to help your defense, because he's not doing you any good on the bench. And it doesn't exactly seem clear why he's not at least getting more run than he has been so far. They have not given a clear answer to that because it's not justified in his grades via all the platforms that grade players.
Yeah, I mean, I think Eric Stokes has been really good on the other side. So that's a guy you want to keep, and maybe even a guy that you would want to talk about an extension with if he continues to play well. But it just seems so obvious when a guy is struggling like Blue is on one side. You would want to play the rookie a little bit more. But usually, I will say during the bye week is a time when teams do ramp up rookies a little bit more. So we'll see what the Raiders do in their bye. Is there a stat that you want to talk about?
It's kind of a bigger team stat, but just turnover margin. They're I think 27th in turnover margin. A lot, we talked about Geno. He's a part of that problem. but the defense is not putting teams up against the wall when it comes to turnovers, whether that's forced fumbles or forcing interceptions. I mean, the Colts game, Daniel Jones, who we thought of as a turnover machine in the NFL, he's corrected a lot of his ills, but he has a really good running game to thank, Shane Steichen to thank, and his own progression to thank. But he is still a guy who will give you the ball. And if you can't get pressure on quarterbacks consistently, then the turnover thing is kind of moot unless you have a guy like, if you have a guy who's just like daring to throw picks. But even then, Tua's been under pressure, which has been most of his issue. But it's all correlated. Not being able to get consistent pressure from the interior pass rush from someone opposite Max Crosby has just allowed teams, especially veteran quarterbacks, to feast on what has been a very zone-heavy defense. Traditionally, we always knew that when I was with good quarterbacks, if they were going to sit in zone, we were going to eat you alive. We were going to carve you apart. Every route concept was an option because they know, hey, this window is different in 2, 3 sky and whatever. And as soon as you give them pre-snap and then a quick post-snap picture, a snapshot, they're reading your mail. And when you can't switch that up fast enough, and when you can't get pressure to speed up their clock, it just affects your opportunity to get off the field, which the defense has tried their best at, but not been able to do. And so, Caillou Blue has had his issues, and they're targeting him, but he's not been helped by a lack of pass rush, and then inevitably the turnovers for this defense have not been there. And I think if you're going to talk about holistic team football play, that's got to be a big part about not giving it away, holding onto the ball, being more consistent there, and then forcing more turnovers and rallying to the football, being just like a ravenous defensive front. And we'll get to this, building that culture. The Pete Carroll culture was that you didn't want receivers who ran slants into their cover 3 look because Cam Chancellor or Browning or someone was taking your head off. They're stout against the run. They had versatile defensive linemen. They would be in a 4-down look with an overhang one week. They'd be in kind of a more 3-down look one week. They could play any style you wanted, and it was physical, and it flew around. Now, I get it. That's a luxury. But if this is the style that you want to play, Patrick Graham it's not all the way his style. He's adapted. We could see him adapting. But if that's what you want, and you want a competitive defense that is really hard to play against, all these things have to kind of improve. Now, a lot of that improvement has to do with talent, and that's a whole nother story. But to me, the turnover margin tells such a huge story about why they haven't been competitive in these games, in these losses. Because even as we know the NFL, the margins are so thin, and most teams are packed in the middle. The Raiders find the way to like shoot themselves in the foot to eject themselves on the back end of that pack. When in reality, there's plenty of teams that are, as about mid like the Raiders are in a lot of aspects, and they're winnable games out there. And I'm going to pull up their schedule. There's some winnable games. Their strength of schedule to start the season was like middle tier. It wasn't really amazing. It wasn't really bad. Let me pull up their.
Well, I mean, looking back at it now, the Patriots win was actually a pretty quality win.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, Jacksonville, Denver's a tough one. Dallas, who can't play defense. Cleveland, who they have 2 rookie quarterbacks, so they don't know what they're doing. And then you have the Chargers, who we thought were going to be perennial, contenders to the Chiefs. A lot of injuries, not playing as well.
Yeah. And they play the Chargers competitively,
Yeah.
So it's winnable.
Winnable. So I see about 5 or 6 winnable games. Obviously, you got the Broncos twice, Eagles, and Chiefs to end the season. But some winnable games that, to me, if you just don't put yourself behind the 8 ball, you're right there in the pack. And so we'll see what kind of concerted changes they're making in the bye week.
Yeah, and back to your point about the takeaways, I think also just playing cover 3 and just being so predictable on defense doesn't help because just the quarterbacks know where the holes are. They just, they're just too comfortable mentally. So I think the last 2 games, they have been trying to switch up their cover just a little bit more. I think it was effective in week 6, and then obviously in week 7 when you play against Patrick Mahomes. He's just one of the best pre-snap readers in the league. But they almost got a couple picks from him on like simulated
when
pressures.
you trick him, yeah, you're right. The picks were, if they bring some of those down, who knows? But even when you trick him, as soon as you turn your back to carry a receiver, you cover a receiver, he just scrambles for just enough to get a first down through the chains. He's just on another level with that when he's healthy. So, but yeah, you're right. I mean, they had him, and part of takeaways is like having guys who are opportunistic, and opportunistic means when the ball hits your hands, or when you're ball Adams and you're chasing and a fumble happens, and then you in turn kick it out of bounds. It's just like that is stuff that, there's a little bit of fumble luck sometimes where the ball bounces. Literally, it's an oblong ball, but man, good teams are around it more often than not.
Hopefully they continue that trend of mixing up their coverages and more disguises after the bye week, because I think that stuff does help. The last stat that I wanted to talk about was the Raiders face the most man coverage in the league. And that just tells you that nobody respects your receivers. So yeah, they have to be able to have a plan against man coverage. The receivers aren't magically going to get better, but Brock Bowers entering the fold will discourage teams from playing man coverage too much. Another way that you could discourage them is turn Ashton Genty into a weapon, because they don't want to match up a linebacker against him. I mean, teams hate playing man coverage against the Niners, because they know that they have to play man coverage on Christian McCaffrey. Even when all the receivers are hurt, they don't want to play man because they don't want to match up a linebacker on Christian McCaffrey. So you got to have a plan against man coverage. A lot of rub routes, picks, and that sort of deal, because you're seeing the most man in the league.
Yeah, and that should inform your scripting, opening script, play calling, just to get guys set up and get comfortable. And then you alluded to it. I mean, both watching and then playing for the Patriots, they had at times plenty of talent, some years less than others, but they used the pick formations and rub routes as well as anyone. There's an acting job that goes into it. There's a level of just like, you got to do it the right way and not get penalties, but there are ways to get guys in man open. And that stat that you just read, as part of the self scout, if you know that that's coming and people are not taking your receiving core seriously from a deep threat standpoint, then use that to your advantage and get them out of it. Or it just won't change. It quite literally will not change. They're going to challenge you at the line. They're going to disrupt the timing that we're talking about, because they don't know. They don't think your receivers can consistently get off press. They don't think your receivers can consistently win one-on-one matchups. And that's the ball game. That it makes you so one-dimensional. It makes, when the average depth of target, Geno was top 10 those first few weeks. They had to reduce it because they couldn't get open down the field and they couldn't complete those passes. So at the end of the day, you're throwing long arm punts into coverage, or you're throwing picks and all that stuff. So they adjusted to that. But now you know that you're getting a lot of one-on-one matchups, and who's going to win? How are you setting guys up to win? And then eventually, who does Geno trust in some 50-50 opportunities? Because that happens. That is part of the league, that if you've got a size advantage, if you've got, a savvy guy, and if you've got a quarterback who traditionally is pretty accurate like Geno, you take some of these one-on-one matchups and you try to beat teams out of playing you in man all the time.
Yeah, sorry, I actually have to correct myself. With the 6th highest rate, I was looking at 12 out of 12 personnel. They see the highest rate of man personnel, but just from all their personnel, the 6th
it
highest
also
rate.
applies. It also applies.
Exactly. Is there any more stats you want to talk about?
No more stats. I don't want to bore people, but I just want to give you all a little bit of taste of like the context that goes with the stats and why they're there, and ways that they can dig themselves out of it if it's a bad stat, or continue to improve on it if it's a good stat. When you hear people talk about advanced analytics and stats, that's all it's for. That's what it should be for. And so, most fans don't want to hear all that stuff, and I'm very aware of that, but it tells a picture. It tells a story about how, teams are conducting themselves and playing.
All right, let's get into our bye week checklist. And, as a player who's been around the league for a long time, like, what kind of improvements and, what kind of big changes can you really make in a bye week?
This can be from a game plan standpoint. They had a couple practices before they left, and guys kind of spread out, and that's a level of that's just to stay sharp and not, both mentally and physically to kind of get your body moving around. But coming back, players want to hear about that the coaches have self-scouted throughout the bye week and a real plan to put us in position to win. I know for sure Max Crosby is going to come back and ask, what are we doing differently than we did the first half of the season? Because our record is what it is. And so veterans understand that, yes, you can't make wholesale changes that quickly, but there are small things that could be done, like maybe giving Max the opportunity to move around the line of scrimmage a little more. Maybe a new blitz package that just, yes, you might play a little bit more man than you have with you on the back end, but you're putting pressure on teams. You're trying to light them up a little bit. On offense, as we've been talking about, knowing who's healthy when you get Brock Bowers back, and building a more holistically balanced offense that still utilizes your weapons in the best form. Teams have shifted and adjusted to what you put out on the field and the tape you have, and they're like, all right, they're going to stop feeding Ashton Genty if we just tackle him a couple times for 2-yard gains. And then they're not going to challenge us downfield, even if it's incomplete. We know that Dante Thornton is kind of a one-trick pony. Trey Tucker is kind of the best guy they have, and they're going to try to throw underneath layered routes. Gino's going to force it because they can't really get a lot of separation, and there's a timing issue. So flip it on its head. I don't know exactly what you do, but more creative, we talk about it, more creative run looks that incorporate pre-snap motion, that incorporate jet motion, Genty both in the pistol, Genty in the gun, and from under center. Gino, early play action from under center, from the pistol, like varying the looks, varying the way that you attack teams, just to give yourself that little bit of an edge. Because I guarantee you that the Chiefs are doing that, and they, when Andy Reid is doing that constantly, we see Pat Mahomes incorporate something new in their offense, something new all the time. They're constantly growing, and so you got to take that mentality into post-bye week.
Exactly. And aside from the schematic things, I wrote down a few checklist items. For example, I think they got to make a decision on Jakobi Meyers. Like Jakobi got interviewed this week, and he said he still wants to get traded. And I get it for him. Like he's been a good camper. Like instead of holding out and making a stink out of it, he's been playing hard. Reportedly, he's been helping out the young players, learn the offense, learn the nuances of the game. So he's been great. Even though he's unhappy with the situation right now. And even though he says he wants to be traded, like we've seen these situations happen in the past where it got really ugly between teams and they still are able to agree to an extension. But I think right now the Raiders haven't even opened up talks with him about an extension. So like you have 1 year left with him. This year is likely not going to be a playoff year. So make a decision on him, whether you're going to trade him and get some draft capital back, because there are a lot of teams that could use the Jakobi Meyers right now. Playoff contenders that could use a receiver like Jakobi Meyers right now, or open up the dialogue to extend him and make him part of your future. So I think they got to make a decision on that. Next, I think you got to ingrain Jack Besh. We talked about just getting some young players involved, and we've seen Jack Besh have some potential as a run blocker. So find ways to incorporate him. And next, get Caleb Rogers, your third round guard. Figure out what he can do, like whether he can compete for some playing time in the interior of the line. And then I like the idea, you talked about this in the past, about getting Charles Grant some reps as a 6 offensive lineman. We see a bunch of teams that have tight ends that struggle to run block. They just put a lineman out there and have them run block. A 6'0" lineman is a good strategy to have. I think especially with a team that has struggled to run block, and just getting him some reps out there. He's probably not ready to play left tackle yet because he was seen as a developmental guy coming out of college, but you just get him some reps.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, just generally playing the younger guys in some kind of way. Obviously, it's a little bit harder with the offensive line, but I agree with the 6 O-line idea. And then, getting more people involved and finding out what you have. If this is like this, it's kind of quasi rebuild, and that's the hard part. Is you feels like you're stuck in the middle. But Darren Porter getting snaps on defense and then on offense, they got to squash whatever's going on with Jack Spurs Johnson and the staff. I don't know if it's Freddie Carroll. It just it doesn't look good. Whether it's maybe JPJ ends up being the one who's at fault, but it just doesn't look good. So they've got to figure that out. And then, getting Jack Bech involved. We've seen his snap count go up the last couple of weeks. But yeah, he's a young player. I mean, in the Kansas City game, they had a nice run, and he lines up in a legal formation. On as does like a neutral zone infraction. And that's just a guy who needs more reps, and you got to challenge him mentally, challenge him physically. But he could be an asset for you, especially if you're trying to move on from Jakobi Meyers. And he's one of those guys. And then hopefully you get some continuity up front instead of flipping guards on stuff. And then when Brock Bowers returns, you feel like, okay, we have something that we could put that is aggressive and a force to be reckoned with on the field. Because right now, I don't even know if they believe they have enough to like produce enough on offense unless you're playing the Titans every week. And so it matters to have players and guys who you can trust, who have either young energy like Bech and like Trey Tucker, or who have veteran experience and leadership. One or the other. So you can go out there and guys feel like they have a chance to win on Sundays. And that's what I'm worried about when all the trade rumors going on with Max is like, if he gets exasperated, obviously he signed an extension. That would be a difficult thing. He had a chance to really test the market. But like you start to lose your guys like that because they don't think they have a chance. They don't think that you're doing a whole lot to improve the team. And that is the last thing that you want when you've got some homegrown talent that you don't want to lose.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's got to be a conversation, and we'll see what they do with some of these young guys coming out of the bye week. Let's get into some fan questions. I put a call out for questions on X. First question from Kyle Morgan. Tonka Hemingway and JJ Pegoose have only played 2 games at defensive tackle. Why do you think Leki Fatu is getting more snaps than them at this point?
Well, I think it's just Fatu playing his way into those snaps. He's made an impact when he's in there. You hear his name. He's disruptive. He gets his hands up for tips. He's splitting blocks on combo blocks. So he's just being disruptive. And my guess is, especially in a scheme like Patrick Graham's, if your defensive lineman is not in position, if he's a rookie who's a step slow, that's just a non-starter. And so my guess is it's not necessarily that those guys are playing poorly, but you have a veteran who knows what he's doing, who's stepping in and making an impact when he does get his opportunity.
Yeah, I think those guys will get more playing time. They are kind of ramping them up. They really need to find a legit pass rusher from that defensive tackle position, especially Adam Butler missed a game against the Chiefs, and you just really saw how bad things could be without Adam Butler. So and he's getting up there in age, so hopefully one of these guys, and there's some athleticism in this group too. So one of these guys can develop into a legitimate pass rusher from their interior. All right, next question from Ozzie Smith. Is Pete Carroll past? I think he's saying, is Pete Carroll past his prime, or has the game passed him by? Having his say on offense, playbook basic to assist Geno and insist they only play one way. He's clearly impacted the defense and personnel. Defensive personnel have regressed. So do you think the game has passed Pete Carroll by?
It feels like he's been a step slow since he got to Las Vegas. I will put it that way. And we can kind of look back to the end of his tenure in Seattle. They weren't a great team. They were, always on the fringe. Russ was, there was the let Russ cook era where they were really trying to pull things out, especially once as the defense slowly, the great defense kind of slowly guys left and disintegrated a little bit. And so I don't think this is the Pete of the peak Seattle years. It's not even close. He's been on the decline. And, someone his age, that seems natural. He's kind of defied that stuff, so far in his career. But it does feel like, because the thing you can always bet on when even the scheme things weren't right, is that the Seattle teams played hard. They were a bitch to go against, and I just don't even feel like the Raiders are that team. Even if you lose, the sign of a team that's kind of figuring it out is just the claws that they scratch with, and I just don't know. I don't see that Sunday to Sunday from the majority of the team, and that's a culture thing. So we'll see if that sets in maybe the second half of the season, but there might be some credence to him losing his fastball.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think if Chip Kelly doesn't work out, then that's another failed coordinator that he's hired, and he's hired. He has a pretty bad backlog going back into Seattle with offensive play callers and defensive coordinators. So I think if you got to take away some of those decisions away from him. Like, I think Spytek has to have final say in personnel, and I'm sure he does. But I would say less influence from Carroll as far as from a player perspective. Like, these are the guys that you're going to coach, or you make a decision on offense coordinator with Tom Brady or whatever for him, and then Spytek works with the coordinators on what kind of players they want. But I just think, as far as from a personnel perspective and from a coaching hiring perspective, the track record from Seattle, going back to Seattle, just hasn't been good. So last question, who are the current players on a roster that you think are foundational players that the team can build around? Thanks.
Ooh,
Love the pod, from Aaron Bursky.
that's a good one. I guess we'll start on offense. I mean, Genty, even if you dispute the Raiders maybe needing a different position, people talk about Membu and all that stuff. That's kind of revisionist, but Genty is a foundational piece for sure. Brock Bowers, obviously. However much left you have in Colton Miller, Jackson Powers Johnson, if he gets cleaning his technique up and consistency, and then Trey Tucker.
What do you think about Mayer?
Michael Mayer, I guess you can throw him in there with Brock Bowers, because if Brock Bowers wasn't on his team, Michael Mayer would be still a very solid tight end. So I agree with that. I think he's still a weapon. I wish they would just continue to use both of them once they're together. And obviously on defense, Max, that this is the issue, is that they've got to the offseason is going to be so important for them, because I'm looking at the depth chart right now, and who do you even point to? You mentioned Stokes, who's having a bounce back. Darren Porter, who's got a lot of potential. I like Jeremy Chin.
Jeremy Chin's pretty well. I mean, you wouldn't give him a monster contract, but I mean, he's a guy that could definitely be a piece of your defense.
Right. But, at linebacker, do you have a young guy? I mean, you gave Jermaine Pratt was a guy who I really liked, but you kind of given up on him. There's been a lot of posts, on side note, on guys who leave the Raiders and go and play well somewhere else. And Pratt's one, and Diablo's another. It's just it feels like the fans have keeping a tally list of guys that go other places and thrive. You tell me who else. Who am I missing?
I mean, the young defensive linemen we need to see a lot more of before we could say any of them are foundational pieces.
Yep.
I mean, defensively, there's just not a lot you could call a foundational piece besides Max Crosby. I mean, I think I would want to see Jamal Adams back. I feel like, I mean, I wouldn't say he's a foundational piece, but I would say he's played well enough to warrant bringing back. I think, with better players around him, he could potentially be a solid piece of your defense. I think he's probably one of the best defenders you have right now.
Yeah, but from that box safety / linebacker kind of guy, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but there's just not a lot of foundational pieces. I think Eric Stokes is probably getting there. You still want to see more from him. So, again, that might be a guy that you could talk about extending, but defensively, there's just a lot more to prove.
Yes.
Yeah. But I mean, that's all we have for you guys today. I think that was a pretty good pod for a bye week. We went through some stats that hopefully the Raiders have looked at themselves. Got through our bye week checklist and got through some questions. So Marshall, thank you again. I know you have a super busy week. You want to let the people know what you got going this week?
Yeah, I'm again been calling TCU games on radio, my alma mater, and then just to kind of doing Big 12 radio in general. And then there's going to be potentially a Big 10 game I'm going to get to do here in a couple of weeks. So staying busy, trying to stay in front of the game, call games. It's really enjoyable to me. So if you find me, please listen, tune in. It's been fun. On top of this podcast, on the analytical reactional side, getting to call games in booth has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to make sure to catch one of those games, even though I'm not a huge TCU guy. But it's always fun listening to you. But let's make sure you guys like, subscribe on YouTube. Tell your friends. I know it's been a rough Raider pod, but it seems like you guys really like Marshall, and you really like the dynamic we have. So make sure you spread the word that we are getting some good work in, even though the Raiders aren't doing too well. Make sure you like and subscribe on Apple and Spotify, and we will talk to you next week because there is no game to react to. All right, guys.
Appreciate it.